Well, good morning. I'm Ken Biberai, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. In the news today, Queen Elizabeth was laid to rest yesterday in the United Kingdom, and President Biden travels to New York tomorrow to address the United Nations General Assembly. Today's topic is how to reach liftoff for clean tech in the United States. And we're thrilled to be joined by Jigar Shah, the director of the Loan Programs Office at the Department of Energy. You may recognize him from Nuclear Today, Truckers Weekly, or all these other, amazing things that have, people have a cult following for you, Jigar. I was joking with Jigar how we promoted this event with you today, and the inbound of friends and colleagues and people who reached out. I mean, it's incredible. People are really, have been tracking you, are inspired by you, or motivated by you. You have a bit of a cult following, I feel like.
Well, it's one of those things where I have been obsessed for a long time with how infrastructure works, and it's just boring. People love their infrastructure. People are like, Jigger, this is great. I really want to get electric buses in my school or solar on my church or whatever it is. But it's never going to make the mainstream front page reports, right? And so I've had an extraordinary experience, frankly, just building infrastructure for the last 20 plus years, and people are getting into it now.
It seems like there's a real moment today, right? So let's just take a step back, a 101 of the Loan Programs Office. Tell us what you're working on, how rubber hits the road, how you're bridging the gap, commercial finance access, and then also talk a little bit about what it was like on day one when you started versus today, rolling into the fall post Inflation Reduction Act, and what that's kind of done to your office.
Yeah, so the concept behind the Loan Programs Office is very familiar to people with real estate backgrounds, right? You would never develop a piece of real estate if you thought that you could never get debt, right? If you're I could never get debt, it's too weird, but we're going to do it anyway. We're just going to 100% equity finance it, right? We're just going to go to our family offices that fund us, and we're just going to get a bigger check from them, right? They'd say, what's wrong with you? If you can't get debt on the project, you're not going to do this deal. But that is exactly how infrastructure works. So pre the Loan Programs Office, there's lots of reasons people don't want to give our projects debt, right? The technology seems weird, right? This is a first of a kind deployment. So a lot of local banks or others are just come back to me when this is project number 10, right? But then you never get to project number 10. And the Department of Energy has 40 years of developing all this technology that's literally gathering dust on the shelf because it's never been deployed, right? So Pete Domenici, back in 2005 Energy Act, created the Loan Programs Office. It had its heyday in 2009 to 2011 during the era stimulus, got about $35 billion of loans out the door. And today it's, gotten a huge amount of support from the president and the secretary. And so we've got 84 active applications seeking $86.5 billion of loans across, 14 sectors, right? So battery storage, nuclear, transmission, recycling, EV charging rollouts, hydrogen, carbon management, you name it. We've got folks interested.
So of those 84 applications, when you set out to kind of, build your own internal infrastructure on where these resources would go, did you have buckets of 10% goes to EV, 20% goes to carbon, 30% goes to nuclear?
Yeah.
How did you think about this? And then how does the market demand impact where you're thinking about this?
Well, we certainly have a responsibility to spread the money around, right? So we can't give it all to one sector. But the problem that you have with buckets is that ultimately, different sectors are ready for debt at different times, right? So when I first came into office, the first folks that were ready to go were sustainable aviation fuel and hydrogen, right? So all the applications were sustainable aviation fuel and hydrogen. And, we got none from low impact hydro, geothermal, even transmission. Today, we have probably $7 billion of transmission loan applications. We're starting to get geothermal and hydro in. So just because I don't have those applications in now doesn't mean we're not chasing them. Sure. It just means that those particular entrepreneurs are not ready to spend 300 hours to put in a loan application. It's not for the faint of heart to put these applications in.
Yeah, so you're not, people aren't just going in and clicking and saying, I need $1 billion for this. This is a process, right? Like your office will help, applicants get through this process, go through a draft, submit them, right? This is a
Oh
journey.
yeah, we've got 20 senior executives that we've hired into the outreach and business development group to mentor these entrepreneurs. Because like, first of all, look, if you're going to get $1 billion on average, like, it's a lot of paperwork. I mean, it would be for a commercial building. It would be for JP Morgan. It would be for anybody. $1 billion is $1 billion, right? Second, though, is that for many of these entrepreneurs, they're equity wizards, right?
Mhm.
They're now on their D round. They've raised $250 million of equity. They can sell ice to Eskimos, right? They're extraordinary. They're just like going out and like they could raise money like there's nobody's business. But if you said to them, we need to look under the hood. I
Yeah.
actually need to see what you've delivered and how well that's worked for customers and how
Mhm.
many complaints you've gotten and how do we fix these things. They don't want to go open kimono. And
Eh,
so like you find that like the first 4 months is me just getting them to like calm down and
yeah.
just saying, look, no one's going to give you $1 billion unless you give them all the warts, right?
Mhm.
Like that's how debt works. Like we're
Yeah.
about your past and what you've accomplished.
Mhm.
Equity is about your future and like how it's going to get better in the future. I
Mhm.
get it, right? Like, but we're not here to see you fail. We're here to help you, but you got to give us all the info, right? And so like a lot of the reason why it takes a while to get through the office is because folks are genuinely scared. They're like, I've never had to show weakness.
Yeah.
Like, I just keep this brave face on all day and I fake it till I make it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I get it, but like now we're in a different league.
That's interesting. So, how does the Inflation Reduction Act impact the scope magnitude of what you're doing? Right. I mean, I feel like you were already kind of in a position of strength with the LPO, and
Yeah.
really, I think takes it to that next level. And then talk a little bit about like average deal size, right? Like if you're having 80 something applicants right now and $1 billion, right? Is this just for like the big gorillas? Are you trying to get smaller innovators, pipeline,
Yeah.
process manufacturers that are building components for projects that are going to be essential? How do you think about kind of distributing it even amongst different levels of company?
Yeah. And so let's start with the IRA. So with the IRA, so when I first came into office, we had roughly $40 billion worth of loan authority left between Title 17, which is really project finance, ATVM, which is the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program, right? So that's the program Tesla got a
Mhm.
loan from. And then we had a $2 billion tribal energy loan guarantee program.
Mhm.
The IRA gave us $100 billion of additional loan resources for those three programs, right? Those three programs already exist. They're already operational. We got more loan authority, right? So roughly 40 billion for Title 17, 40 billion for ATVM, and 20 billion for tribal. Now, we have so many loan applications in. We have roughly $67 billion loan applications in for Title 17 that with the 20 billion we had before, 22 roughly, and 40 billion more, we're already still oversubscribed in Title 17.
Wow.
And so we've got to like figure out a way to get more loan authority there. We then got a new program called 1706, which is the way that works is it's 5 billion of credit subsidy, which means that we pay all the points on your loan. And so everyone gets the same interest rate. They get US Treasuries plus 3/8, no matter how risky you are. If you're super risky, we pay more points. If you're less risky, we pay less points, right?
Mhm.
And it's unlimited amounts of loan authority until the 5 billion runs out. So if we do super risky loans, then 10% credit subsidy is like a risky loan.
Yeah.
Then that means that we could support 50 billion in loans, right? $1 billion loan, we have to pay 100 million of points. If it's very low risk, then that 5 billion could stretch to 250 billion, right? So that's a new program. We'll see who uses it and all that stuff. But yeah, no, it's a fascinating new day with the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah, and are you pleased with the response from the private sector? I mean, so much of this is got to be about the response you get from actual companies who are coming to you for loans and applying, right? I mean,
Yeah, novel new concept, huh?
yeah,
Like we're in the customer service business.
yeah,
The other day, someone came to me and said, "Jigar, you must feel really powerful." I was like, "Yeah, if begging people to like put in loan applications is power, then yeah,
yeah,
I'm all powerful."
yeah.
Yeah, look, I mean, I would say of all 84 loan applications we've received, I had to beg each and every one of those 84 CEOs to come in,
Yeah.
right? Because like, I mean, this office was dormant for 10 years, right? So it's not like we had this long track record of helping everybody, et cetera. Like we have the 2009 to 2011 time
Mhm.
period. and then we're dormant basically, except for a couple of follow-on loans for the Vogtle nuclear plant. So, a lot of folks are like, are you guys for real? Like, are you
Yeah.
really going to like give us a loan? Like, like what does the White House think? Like, are they like you worried about future losses? Like, are they going to get this done? And so we've had to earn trust every day.
Sure.
And now we're at a point where people are starting to go, wait a second, you've already issued 2 loans. You've like gotten 4 conditional commitments done. You're like on track to approving multiple conditional commitments a month. Wow, this place is really hopping. So
Yeah.
from that perspective, I think things are going really well. And we're starting to we used to get about 1 loan application a week in. Now we're getting more like 2 a week. So
Right.
and I think we're going to get up to about 3 a week here pretty soon. So it's pretty exciting.
And the benefit of loans from your office is not just the debt and that facility, right? You get added on benefits, credibility, validation because of the
Yeah, the loans are the smallest part of what we do, for sure. There's a couple things that we do. One is that so people who borrow money from us, by definition, we become their agent throughout the government. So
Yeah.
we accelerate their NEPA, right? So our NEPA process is half the time of the normal government NEPA process. Like people say, oh, we're having a problem with another agency on, this other thing. Can you work this out with us? Well, yeah, like we go in as colleagues and say, hey, I have an applicant who really needs your office to figure out why this permit's not been issued or this thing has not been issued. And people don't throw us out of their office because they're like, oh, you're a fellow colleague from the government. Like, let me tell you straight why this is not happening. And then I can tell my applicant straight why it's not happening, right? And it's usually because the applicant forgot a piece of paperwork or something happened and the applicant didn't know and the other government agency wasn't communicating to them in a way that they could understand it. And so we're facilitating things that are frankly just misunderstandings.
Sure.
And so a lot of these projects are going through. So a lot of folks are coming in actually and requesting our loan because they're like, actually, Jigar, what we need you to do is navigate the government for us.
Wow. Fascinating. So a year ago, interest rates were super low. Capital and equity was flowing down the streets. And you had a certain balance sheet. Today, interest rates have gone up. Private capital markets have kind of frozen, and you have triple the authority that you did a year ago. Is this a moment now where you think your office maybe has even increased leverage or potential than maybe you even did a year ago?
Oh, for sure. But I mean, honestly, Ken, I'm old enough where these interest rates still feel low.
I know.
I mean, I remember where 6% was super low, and you're like, oh my God, we're down to 5.5%. This is amazing. And so, I think we still have very low interest rates. I think the fact that we've been addicted to 0% interest rates for, whatever it is, 14 years is probably not a good thing for my parents who, are on fixed incomes and who just want to make some solid returns off their CDs in their bank. So look, I think that I think interest rates are still fine. I think the credit markets are trying to figure out where the new normal is. The projects that we're funding are amazing.
Yeah.
And so the other thing that we do, which is amazing, and it's great that we have so much interest in the office, and you're right, some of the macro conditions affect that, is that all of the major commercial banks are looking over our shoulder, right? Because remember, they all have announced that they're going to invest $1 trillion into clean energy, right? When they go to those climate change meetings, they're like, we're going to invest $1 trillion between now and 2030. And then when you go to them for a loan, they're like, well, we only want to give it to you for solar, wind, and battery storage. And there's 20 other sectors. I was like, well, what about EV charging? What about methane pyrolysis? What about transmission lines? What about hydrogen? And so a lot of them are whispering to me and saying, hey, Jigar, we kind of have a lot of pressure to do these other sectors. Can you guys show us how you do them? And, we can learn from you. And so
that force multiplier effect is going to be kind of
totally. And we want that. We don't want people coming to loan programs office. We want them going to the commercial banks. We're a bridge to bankability. And so for us, we're saying we'd like to get out of that business for that particular sector as fast as possible. I mean, Lord knows I don't want to compete with the private sector. And so it's great. So these banks are looking over our shoulder going, hey, Jigar, how'd you guys figure that out? How'd you figure that out? What about this question? What about that question? Right. And then, the secretary's got this global clean energy action forum that we're doing this week in Pittsburgh. And we've brought all those banks together with over 400 CEOs from the private sector. And like we've said to them, look, guys, like you can't ignore the federal government and expect your sectors to get to $1 trillion scale.
Yeah.
Like, and so you got to tell us what's wrong. Tell us how we're like, inadvertently screwing you over. Tell us like what policies, like we didn't mean to put that in place, but it got in place in the 1990s and it's still in the books. Like, tell us what's going on. And they're like, we used to ignore you. Like, why are we talking to you? And
Customer service.
Absolutely. And now they're saying, actually, the time that we're investing in you is paying dividends. We're seeing that the grant programs that are being put out the door at DOE are far more responsive to what we were telling you than we were expecting, right? This is actually working. Us giving you feedback is actually working where you're more responsive to our industry. And so they're starting to get super involved. And so that brings me a lot of joy, right? Because I was one of those people, right? Before I took this job, I never checked with the federal government before I made an investment out of Generate Capital or, other things. So it brings me a lot of joy to be able to facilitate that.
So when the office was first in its heyday, it was American Recovery Act, right? This was like like recession, etc. Mandate and pressure, time, speed, shovel ready, money out the door. Today it's a little different, right? To talk about the pressure and about the time horizon in which you now can play versus maybe how the LPO had to operate previously.
Oh yeah, no, we're exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're getting accused of feeding inflation. And so, so we're being very deliberate, right? Like a lot of what I've said to my colleagues within the Department of Energy, but also here at the Loan Programs Office is like, we have to achieve liftoff, right? Like no matter how much, like basically when you think about technology commercialization, it's always in infrastructure, it's always $100 billion. It's always $100 billion. So if you look at solar, to get the cost, and there's four parts to commercialization, right? There's first of a kind deployment, then there's engineering excellence, right? Getting the EPC contractors to not be afraid of the project, right? Then you've got learning curve, right? We've all learned about how solar's gotten cheap, wind has gotten cheap, lithium-ion batteries gotten cheap. And then the fourth stage, which everyone forgets about, is Wall Street securitization, right? Wall Street has to be able to securitize this paper and sell it to insurance companies, right? And so that process took like 12 years for solar, wind, and lithium-ion batteries. We think we can get that process down to 5 or 6 years, right? By getting everyone to coordinate with each other, right? And then the question is, how much money do we have to put in? So on $100 billion, $100 billion is always private sector capital. And remember, the private sector is the one who leads this. The American approach to commercialization is the private sector is the ones who decide, and then we enable, right? So it's private sector led, government enabled, right? So now how much enabling do we have to do? So like for solar and wind, it was roughly $5 billion worth of loan guarantees that we had to do to unlock $100 billion, right? But for, nuclear, it could be that we have to provide $50 billion worth of loan guarantees for $100 billion, right? And then for sustainable aviation fuels, it might be 25 billion, right? Each sector is going to have a different set of challenges before Wall Street is like, you know what? We got it. We're totally comfortable now. We're going to take the ball, right? But, at the end of the day, as I say, we got to deploy.
I just say coffee. So what I find fascinating about your background, right? Sun Edison, Generate Capital, working with Richard Branson on the nonprofit side. Now you're in government. This is a moment where all these resources, all this capital, all this potential is there. Are you happy in that chair you're in right now? Or do you wish you were back at Generate, kind of being in a position to take advantage of this and take this pot and really get out there? Like, where can Jigar Shah make the biggest impact? Is it innovation in the private sector? Is it now in government and using your credibility with the private sector to get them to submit these applications?
Yeah. Look, I created Generate Capital with my two co-founders so that I could retire there. Yeah. Right. So I was super happy at Generate Capital. Yeah. But, like when you get called to serve, you gotta take that seriously. Right. And so, so when they called me, I was like, are you guys serious? I thought this program was dead. I think I had a podcast, the Energy Gang podcast, where in October of 2020, they asked me and I was like, there's no chance this program's coming back. And then they asked me to run it. And I was like, oh, damn. I wish I wouldn't have said that on the record. And then and now I'm in the job. And it turns out the people who work here are extraordinary. That's not the issue. They didn't necessarily have the ability to fill the funnel, but
Yeah.
evaluating the loans, they're amazing at doing.
Mhm.
And like part of the reason I took the job was because I recognized that like I could make a lot of money doing what I was doing, but we weren't actually going to solve climate change or save gigatons of carbon without a partnership with the government.
Mhm.
And look, it hasn't been easy every single day, but frankly, everyone who surrounds me is doing it for the right reasons, and
That's
it's
right.
been a great experience. Um, but look, I can safely say that without me picking up the phone, and I've done that for I don't know, at least 400 CEOs at this point,
Yeah.
and saying to them, look, I need you to give me a chance. I need you to like actually invest your own personal time. Don't send me your government relations person. Don't
Yeah.
send me your policy person. I need your time.
Mhm.
And they've delivered, right? I
That's-
got all these loan applications. I've got another 200 CEOs preparing them actively. But also, like when the secretary has called for people to give us advice on how to structure the hydrogen hubs, we were
Yeah.
able to get the top 35 hydrogen CEOs to join the meeting, not their government relations people,
Yeah.
right? We were able to get the top 35 EV charging CEOs to come on
Mhm.
the call, not their government relations people. And it makes a difference because they're the ones in charge of capital allocation, right? And so if me serving
Yeah.
gets them to actually like pay attention and really put the time and effort into making this country like able to rebuild its energy infrastructure to lead the energy transition and then to create the export industries of the future here.
Mhm.
I mean, that's worth putting your time and effort into.
So speaking of time and effort, we were talking before we went live about, young people and innovation and new companies really starting in service-based industries versus infrastructure. Now, infrastructure kind of becoming an area where more attention is being prioritized from young people, from innovators, right? So if you were a young person who's looking at this moment and wants to put their brain power, their connectivity, their resources in a bucket, do you have recommendations on where you think people should be focused that maybe aren't getting enough attention today? Is it nuclear? Is
Well,
it
whether,
like what bucket would Jigar Shah 20 years ago be laser focused on, like you were with Sun Edison, right? Like what today?
plastics, my boy, plastics. No,
Plastics.
isn't that like, wasn't that The Graduate? But look, I mean, I think that, let me say it this way, right? I mean, I've been in the DC area since 1996. Actually, never knew anyone who really worked in the federal government except for my wife, who was at the State Department. Because DC has a huge entrepreneurial culture. So I mostly hung out with folks in the entrepreneurial culture here. And, folks like created restaurants. They like, they did all sorts of interesting concepts, right? And I just think entrepreneurship is great. All of those people have called me and said, Jigger, I don't want to do my next restaurant. I want to work in what you do. And I was like, really? And they're like,
That's
yeah.
right.
And so, I mean, but also tech. We have so many tech people who are like, I am disenchanted with working at, Facebook or Google or Microsoft or whatever it is. And these are great companies. Don't get me wrong. They do great work, but they're like, I want to do more with my time and my focus. And, you've got this great organization, Climate Base, which has gotten like hundreds of thousands of people that have like, like submitted their resumes, and they're all tech employees and they're trying to get placed. And look, far be it from me to tell people which sector is the best. I mean,
Sure.
I think nuclear is hard. And if you want a really hard problem to solve, like that is where the next Elon Musk is going to come out of, is out of nuclear. Right. So we'll see where that's going to go. But Lord Almighty, like, remember, Elon was sleeping under his desk. So you got to be prepared for that. And then, you've got other sectors where I think it's a lot more straightforward. Like sustainable aviation fuels is pretty straightforward. Transmission is pretty
Sure.
straightforward. They're all hard. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. Right. Like my motto is it's simple, not easy.
Yeah.
But
That's,
um, but look, I mean, I think that I think everyone, all of our sectors, like, building automation, energy efficiency, all of those sectors need people. But I also think people who don't strictly work in energy infrastructure are also needed. Like, I mean, I have a lot of friends who do real estate, and they're starting to say, you know what, Jigger, every building we're building is now net zero. We're now, every parking lot we build, 50% of the parking spots are going to be EV chargers. We're putting in like full automation into our buildings so we can save 30%. Actually, this new building, I'm not even connecting it to natural gas. We're just making it all electric. And so, like, even in other sectors like real estate or other places. I have a guy who's a good friend of mine. His family has been building boats for over 100 years, right, in Maine, probably 200 years. I think his like son is named after a president, like who was like one of our fifth president, and like and they're making electric boats now, right? And so when you think about where we are today and where how quickly this transition is permeating every single thing, like I talked to somebody who owns 5 Taco Bells, and he said to me, Jigger, nobody comes in to eat at the restaurant anymore. We're putting in fast chargers in all of our Taco Bells, and we're putting a vehicle therein, and Uber and Lyft drivers are coming to our Taco Bell, renting that vehicle, driving all day, so the chargers are now empty.
Yeah.
And people are coming to my Taco Bell just to charge their electric vehicle. And it has been the best business decision I've ever made. Now, all the other Taco Bell franchise owners are copying this guy and putting in fast chargers. Costco, Walmart, everyone's doing it now.
How much of your time do you spend selling internally within government, like Department of Transportation, state, any other agencies? I mean, how horizontal can you go within government as an advocate?
It's like half and half. It's like half and half. I mean,
that's pretty high.
But I'm not selling as much as I'm explaining. I would say that I have not seen any pushback within government around this transition. I think everyone's all in on what the president's suggesting. This is the largest wealth creation opportunity of our lifetimes. And this is the way to project American power around the world. We're helping them with our technology. It's amazing, right? But I think there's a lot of folks who are like, how do infrastructure investors make decisions? How does this growth company decide whether they're going to do this or this? They genuinely don't know. That's not their field, right? Yeah. And so we're doing a lot of explaining. And I've brought in over 70 executives, 20 in outreach and business development, but others in our pathways group, et cetera. And they're also following up on all my conversations with government officials saying, okay, now here are the 4 things that Jigar said I didn't understand. Yeah. You're a safer place to ask questions, right? Fine. And so look, we gotta explain this stuff to people. The notion that we're gonna softly sort of badmouth people because they don't understand this because they haven't been working in this for 20 years is ridiculous. And so we got to explain ourselves. I mean, we started off this conversation, I'm famous in trade magazines and Nuclear Today and Recycling Today, right? Which is great, right? But most of these people haven't been reading those publications.
Coffee with Ken is that pendulum. Lift off, Jigar. Coffee.
Exactly. Lift off.
Last question. I mean, in terms of the education and conversation, especially in the private sector, I mean, I'm personally very bullish on what's happening, right? With infrastructure, with CHIPS Act, with inflation reduction. I just think there's going to be a need for more real estate to accomplish some of these goals.
Oh,
right?
For sure. 100%.
Facilities for, Micron's doing big facilities, and Viva, there are big companies out there that are going to need it. EV charging stations, across the country. I worry that some of those players and local governments that need to rezone some sites, maybe because in the industrial sector today has a 2% vacancy rate. There's just not sites. So if you get a big loan from, the LPO, something we're actually finding the sites in the United States, I think is actually going to be a bit of a challenge that maybe people aren't spending enough time on. I could be off, but.
No, you're exactly right. But this is where I think we can be intentional as a country as well, right? And so instead of making the rich richer, we can help decide to help people who frankly need more help, right? There's a lot of people with abandoned mine lands, right, that have been cleaned up. You can put industrial sites on. There's a lot of people with brownfield land that can that have already been cleaned up. There's a lot of Native American tribes who want to host some of these industrial facilities on their land and create jobs for their people, right? So there's a lot of former coal power plant sites, former natural gas sites, right? Former tank farms, right? There's just so much old energy infrastructure. And I've got up to $250 billion to help convert those sites into productive use for the next 50 years. And what it comes with is a built-in workforce that still has a 7% unemployment rate. right? The people who live around those sites have a 7%, 8% unemployment rate. And so there's actually workers there. And so I think we have to just be a little bit more intentional about not doing the easy thing, but actually working a little harder to do the hard thing. And I actually think it's hugely profitable and wealth creating to do the hard thing. So I don't think we're asking people to sacrifice. We're just saying spend the extra 20 hours looking at this site over here where there's a built-in workforce, where there's folks who frankly have been forgotten for 30, 40 years.
The words of Jigar Shah, simple, not easy. Thank you so much for joining us today. A real treat, and best of luck in Pittsburgh. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. Our next Coffee with Ken is going to be later this week, actually, with Kwame Spearman, the CEO of Tattered Cover Books in Denver. We're going to talk about the resurgence of independent bookstores. In the meantime, please visit coffeewithken.com to subscribe and catch up on past sessions. Jigar, best of luck, and thanks for making the time today.
Thank you, Ken.